Right, should we just roll with it? Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Haunted Hacker. Today I am your host, Ryan, Data Hater. Today we've got Mike Monique from DroneSec. Say good day, Mike.
G'day, everyone. Good to be here.
We're just going to run it pretty much the same as normal. I'm not going to go through any news because, well, we just got to hope this thing works. Yeah, so let's hey, Mike, so why don't you tell us a little about who you are and what got you into security and a little bit about DroneSec. Actually, let's just start with you. Tell us about you, Mike.
Nice. Yeah, okay. So I work and live down here in Melbourne, Australia. I've been a security professional, or at least in the InfoSec scene, for almost my whole life. And that doesn't mean from a baby. It's just when you start picking things up, you go with it. Look, I've dabbled in everything from pen testing to red teaming, the physical intrusion side, and then kind of made a segue into drones. That drones element has been since around 2016. And from about 2019, we really took down the business avenue and started taking a more serious look at it in the global side of things. So I have passions in the capture the flag and gamification space. So a big believer in gamification to enable security skills. I wrote a thesis on it back at university. So when I talk about gamification being a big part of my life, it has. Yeah, other than that, it's just been a bit of a roller coaster through my life of a mix of open source intelligence leading towards drones and cyber physical systems, and kind of that interconnection between cybersecurity and physical security. I think that's the biggest part of where I've kind of moved into, rather than just focusing on the digital side, which was for a long time the norm.
So there, okay.
Oh, I can't hear you, man. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, gotcha.
Tell us about that gamification thing. What was the attraction there? What got you into the game, like the gamification style of things?
Yeah, so gamification was pretty important for me because back in university, so I was into security before I started at university, but going into that, I realized a whole lot of that was really theoretical, and there was hundreds of people back then who wanted to learn pen testing skills or hands-on skills and how to actually do the things we're learning about. And for a large part of them, just multiple choice question answer was not the way that you learn security, especially when you'd be learning about things like encryption and how encryption saves stuff, but you wouldn't actually learn how to put it onto a server and allow that server to be more safer, or things like that. So the hands-on part was missing. And so, I found my thrill initially before university through practical hacking. And for a lot of the kids that were in my same cohort, they couldn't do the same. There was no practical element. So we started doing a lot of capture the flag events, everything from the in-person ones to the online ones. Australia has that, large university cohort one that happens every year and that type of thing. And you just see kids start to thrive on it, right? So the moment you put something in their hands that they can see what they're doing in front of them, it makes it so much more interesting. So we started up a security club, and we focused on learning through doing and seeing the changes in front of you, and everyone getting good at something particular, right? So you'd have someone who'd start getting good at forensics, you'd have someone who'd start getting good at reverse engineering or web applications, that type of thing. So there's a few elements to gamification which are awesome. The one is the ranking system, right? Because they feel like they can see their progress in real time. Yeah. The other one is that kind of that competitive edge, and that's something that I thrive on. Other people maybe not so much. I know people who hate capture the flags, but some people just love the thrill of having to be able to compare themselves to a leaderboard or a ranking. The time pressure is something, again, some people love, some people hate, especially when it comes to OSCP exams. But in a CTF setting, it is a great motivator to learn a lot. And you think you're struggling, you think you're bashing your head against a wall, but you get to the point where you look at yourself and you're like, over the past 24 hours, I've learned more than in 6 months of trying to learn this by myself, because it was just, you just keep going. You're hitting that resistance. So the time pressure is one, the ranking system's another. And then again, it was just almost real life scenarios. Not all CTFs, but a lot of them do have good scenarios which make it fun, make it interesting, and are based on something that's happened. So
like the CyberCX one with the bank hacking, that I had so much fun at that. That was like probably the most fun Australian one I've done.
Nice.
We
Okay.
got,
Yeah, there's there's a few good Aussie ones. Aussies have a great way of entwining the story into it, right? So
yeah,
the storytelling is a big one. Um, yeah, so the gamification part after those years at uni, I actually ended up doing an honors degree because I just wasn't ready to step out into the initial graduate positions that there seemed to be in the industry at the time. And so I thought, what a better way to write a thesis on why gamification works for security education and learning and things like that. So that's kept close to my heart. It's never been a part of work or paid work or anything like that. But
yeah.
I've had fun making CTFs and playing in them for a very long time, both me and my wife. So it's a lot of
Right.
fun. It's something we bond over. Yep.
Oh, so your wife's involved in the security scene as well, or
Yeah,
she's
that's
just a
correct.
fan?
She's on the blue side. So
Yeah.
red side and blue side, it makes a good
Oh,
couple,
what a
right?
perfect couple,
Couples that
man.
hack together,
So,
stay together.
so walk me through how you got from doing your honors then onto OSINT work. You're saying open source intelligence, and then from that into DroneSec. How did that progression happen?
Yeah, so the OSINT part has just been an interesting kind of sideline. So OSINT was something that was my speciality. I was great at back then during CTFs and that type of thing. But for a while, we were working on. I'm sure you've heard the Trace Labs missing persons work. That was good fun. That's where you've got to use open source intelligence skills for finding and locating missing people. We did pretty well at some of those, and the whole point was that we brought people in that then could sharpen their skills. That's led on an interesting journey of either journalists or families of missing people contacting us and just being involved in that over and over again, even outside of Trace Labs and things like that, because you're being able to do good for it. And the reason why missing people is pretty important to us. The reason why maybe you've seen it on our like DroneSec is a great way that I've been able to help fund some of those charities and things like that. Is there's this weird concept of a missing person is not they're not passed away, right? So you don't have the conclusion, and they're not found. So there's this like weird limbo middle ground where you don't know what the status of that person is. And so using something like OSINT is one of those left field skills that hackers can use to do good, and do good by families and help them know that there's someone working on it out there. So that kind of stuff's to the side. It doesn't lead directly into the drone sec side, but we definitely utilize some of those for open source intelligence when it comes to threat intelligence and drones. The way I kind of got into that was, well, I initially started working, did a short stint at defense. I worked at BAE for a little while with a just absolute A team over there for a little while,
Mhm.
that was doing pen testing, and then moved into Privatsec as well and did security consulting for some time. But it was actually at BAE where the idea kind of triggered. There was a project that was hacking into drones, and being able to just see a drone flying around one moment and then being ported to the keyboard the next section and seeing the video of the drone on the laptop and then the drone just being completely controlled. I was sitting there going, why is this not a more important issue? There's drones being used for mobility, delivery, transport. They're going to have all these things in the future, for very good reasons, right? They're cheap, they're effective, they've got huge feature sets, they take people out of dangerous jobs. There's all these good things about them, and so I'm like, why is no one focusing on these, either the exploits themselves and the vulnerabilities of the drones, or trying to harden them and trying to protect them? And that was kind of early days. Drones were still using Wi-Fi as connectivity and wireless, protocols and that kind of thing. So really weak stuff, but still there was commercial drones that were weak and vulnerable. And so I thought that was surprising. So from that point onwards, I started researching in the area, but it was nascent for a while. No one wanted to take drone security services for
Yeah.
years until 2 years ago. And even still, it's a tough battle. It's more about educating them what's out there and the threats, before getting to it. So, look,
So what was that
journey.
tipping point 2 years ago? The tipping point that changed people's minds, that got DroneSec, like gave DroneSec that edge.
Yeah. Okay. So we were trying to show them that we could do services like pen test drones, harden your drones, be able to show you how weak your drones are. And the one thing is that not that many companies were actually using drones in a commercial capacity back then, not enough to warrant security services. The other thing is that, the counter drone industry started rising up. And it's really important that there's no cybersecurity of drones without the counter drone industry. So the counter drones are the systems that will sit there and either take out a drone in the air, geofencing, um, RF hacking into the drone and manipulate it to land somewhere or spoof it, or shoot out of the sky. And the
Ah,
reason why it's so interconnected is because you've got more and more drones. People want to protect it from entering that perimeter, and so they use various defense mitigation mechanisms to take that drone down. So one of those big tactics is by hacking into the drone, or providing more power to get the drone to stop midair. Look, at the end of the day, it's just a hovering laptop, right? So it's got a
yeah.
Linux OS. It's got probably got IP tables sitting in there in the drone. It's got all these same kind of things as a computer. Um, so the counter drone industry started rising really quickly in pace, and that also meant that people looked around. They were like, "Wait, we're using drones, even 80 or $100,000 drones. There's technologies out there that you can buy for $300 that can take my drone down in a second. So why are we not worrying about this?" That was
So,
probably the turning point.
so for people who don't know, can you go through the I guess the legalities, just even in Australia or like territories that you're familiar with taking down the drone, like that like the anti-drone stuff is like you can't just shoot it out of the sky. Like, what are the difficulties with like anti-drone technologies?
Yeah, I mean you can shoot out of the sky in some parts of the Middle East, right? It makes it a bit easier. But over here in the home base, it is really difficult. In fact, you can't even manufacture counter drone systems over here to a certain extent because they have GPS jammers or things like that. So there's a slew of legal issues, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but the first one is the Cybercrime Act, right? You can't hack into someone else's computer. It's an operating computer. That's the one. The other one is interfering with an operating radio communications device, right? So you can't interfere with that and manipulate its signal. The next one is the fact that it's still considered an aircraft. So you're actually manipulating an aircraft's trajectory or control, right? You're making an aircraft lose control and fall down. So there's a slew of stuff that'll either land you in prison or a pretty big fine if you do take a drone down. That's because the legislation is so old. But once you have counter drone stuff, right? I'll give you an example. It's quite a problem in China, for example. People will use drones to drop, say, poisonous meat into pig pens and cause the price of pork to go up because the pigs are. I probably need to put a bit of a trigger warning there. But there's a lot of people using drones for bad, and so others would buy those counter drone systems, install them, aim them at the sky, and jam that area or stop that drone from entering there. The problem is you've got planes going overhead, and those planes can get affected. Their GPS
Yeah.
systems get affected. Their other systems get affected by these counter drone systems. And so it manipulates a whole bunch of other stuff out there. It's not just unless you've got a very specific system, it's not a very narrow band targeted, attack
Ah,
on that one RF band. A lot of the time it's just like goes wide and attacks everything out there. So
yeah.
there's reasons why it's here. Counter drones are still used in Australia by police in some occasions and military, but your average industrial control system, that type of thing, can't use it.
Yeah. So sorry, something just dropped out. So what are the solutions in Australia? Well, how do Australian companies get around this? Like,
Yeah, okay. So you've got a drone problem, and probably the most common thing we hear is like, I've got a drone problem. There's drones flying over. They're doing reconnaissance, surveillance, that type of gathering, or they're causing an issue, and that's where people go back to the cybersecurity side of things. How can we maybe even just passively detect where the operator is and then send the police or send someone to them?
yeah,
Again, there's certain laws around that, but look, when you have a drone in the air, you've got a controller somewhere that's sending those commands,
yeah,
depending on the drone, right? And it's an RF-based signal that's coming to and from. So depending on how you're detecting things, you may just be able to pick up where that operator's controller is even before the drone's taken off. So the moment it creates that sync with the drone,
yeah.
you can pick that up with an SDR or something like that. And hello, there's my cat. She's
Cat,
joining
how
in
are
the
you?
podcast. So there's that type of scenario where you can use passive detection only. Trying to counter a drone at the moment, there is very little hope for you if you're just an average citizen. It's
Yeah.
very, very hard, and that's what's trying to change as time goes on. But yeah, look, you can't look at it with a scope of just cybersecurity. If you use cybersecurity to take down a drone, you're looking at the physical security elements. That drone's going to come down, it's going to hurt someone. It could be autonomous, all these different combination things. So it's hard to pick that up. But look at the main thing that we focus on at DroneSec, where people can't do countermeasures, is that threat intelligence part. So what are the threat actors that are out there that are using drones for an extension of their capabilities, right?
Yeah.
And are they using them to try and hack into Wi-Fi from an extended distance, or are they actually using them to drop explosive payloads or things like that? What are their tactics, techniques, and procedures that we often see? Once you know those and you're tracking them, you can let someone know, and they start to find out all these other mitigations. So let's say you have a prison. If you see a drone and you can't take it down, what's the first thing you do? You call the prisoners out of the yard back into the main area. That's what's called, a standard operating procedure that they can do, even though they can't actually physically take down the drone.
Yeah.
So there's small things you can do there, but that's part of the learning process.
So what do you what do you find is the main, like, for adversarial use of drones is what's the, I guess it's very, overseas is very different to Australia. Australia is probably quite calm, but is it the prison drops? Is it dropping like explosive payloads? Is it reconnaissance? What's the main thing that gets reported to you guys and your platform?
So probably intelligence, surveillance, or reconnaissance is the main one, right? So you can send a drone up and see what's happening for 5 kilometers away, whether it's precursor to a robbery that occurs because you can tell no one's home and you've done a scoping of that. And I see Gab's put his hand up. So
go for it, Gab. What, you got a question, mate?
Yeah. What about in the case of airports with drones? Because over here we've had a couple of incidents where they've flown some over one of our main airports called Heathrow, and it caused a lot of problems there with planes taking off. This is quite a big danger to life. What about, is there any sort of loopholes around it there, or is it still the same sort of issues you'd face generally?
Yeah, and I'll preface that with I think there's still some entities that don't know if that was a drone or a paper bag. But before we get
Fair
into
enough.
that was a critical turning point for the counter drone industry, right? Because they started looking at typical like infosec solutions that have been around for a while in the jamming and manipulation space, as well as looking at those kinetic solutions. Can we catch a drone with a net, or with an eagle, or shoot it out of the sky, or use a laser, that type of thing. By the way, infosec solutions are winning in the counter drone space because they're methodical. You can actually force a drone to land in a specific area by spoofing a command that would have been used to, or by cutting that control and forcing it to return to home, to a safe spot. So infosec solutions are actually paving the way for counter drones, which is good to know, and we should keep researching on it. But with the Heathrow Gatwick kind of intersection, so the one thing they realize is, if you have a drone in your airspace, you have to land your planes, or you have to ground them. You can't have them in the area, because a single drone in an engine, it's not, unfortunately, again, this is horrible to say, but it's not soft like a bird, like they usually have bird strikes. It's got a LiPo battery, it's got plastic, metal that goes into an engine, and it's proven time and time again that'll cause an issue, right? So one single drone that costs $200 or $300 may potentially cause a jetliner to crash, right? That's the high end of the risk, but it's the reality of that risk. So suddenly you've got one of these, imagine a bunch of people sitting in a boardroom and they're like grading their risks. The $200 risk to take down a jetliner is way too open than, for example, someone hopping the fence and running onto the tarmac or things like that. So that's why it caused so many issues. That I think that Heathrow Airport issue costed something like $80,000 per minute that occurred because of the cost to the airliners and that type of thing. And they ended up purchasing, a counter drone system in the millions that was meant to be able to stop those drones. But what was your question about what about airports? Because right now airports are looking into that counter drone technology, or at least the detection technology.
Yeah.
You're seeing, this is pretty cool, right? So where you have counter drone systems, usually they sit and look at a 2-kilometer radius. They detect drones through a variety of ways, the RF sensors or optical recognition. They try to determine, is that a bird? Is that a drone? And then they make a decision. But counter drones are almost like antivirus, right? They have similar heuristics. They have similar ways of detecting and picking up a drone. Where antivirus, or at least let's say the more advanced guys, are winning is where they have this global network that tells each other when a new virus is seen or a new malware strain has been seen. Counter drones are not at that level yet, right? So they're actually just based on what they see in front of them, and then they try to determine if it's good or bad. They try to use some kind of threat modeling, like, is this drone capable of carrying an explosive payload? Is this drone, has it been seen before at other airports? Is it the type that could be bad? They try to do that, but they're not yet smart.
Yeah.
And when you think about smart AV, if that's the thing, but if you think about the more advanced ones that actually work, a lot of them are that interconnected mesh of sensors. So with counter UAS, it's going to get to a point where they're going to be searching in a database of a bunch of known threats. They're going to be like, okay, this drone has been seen in Venezuela, or this type of drone activity has been seen in Venezuela. Maybe it applies to us over here. Make all those kind of connections and then force that drone to land. If it's bad, or if it's good, allow it to continue flying, friend or foe type thing. So with airports, we're still not seeing adequate protection mechanisms, and that's why the counter drone industry is growing so quickly. But we will in the future see them all connected. So just for example, here in Australia, all major aerodomes have a detection network, and they're trying to be able to tell when a drone enters one airspace, notify all the other pilots, notify the police, that type of thing. And sometimes it's easy to do. Do you guys know about the DJI product called Aeroscope? If you know about that one.
Yeah, sure do.
Yep.
Thanks to you and
Okay.
your awesome course, but yep.
Okay, so Aeroscope, for those of you who don't know, was a product that DJI, the drone maker, actually put out themselves, and they pitched it as law enforcement can use this to detect drones and find out who's flying it. And that's because one of the packet responses, or one of the little ID pieces that gets translated from the drone to the controller and so forth, tells you who's flying the drone. It's got their DJI username and email address. It only works for DJI products, but that's the type of thing they're trying to get to is you've registered your drone, you're using a drone, we can tell you who's flying it. It doesn't help if you've bought a secondhand drone off the market, or found say a DJI account and dehashed or something, but that's what they're trying to be able to do. So that was a very long-winded answer to the airports question, but I think that kind of summarizes it. They're not there yet. They're building towards that capability.
What about for hack drones, mate? With that, when they're hacked and they change the frequencies that they run on, the protocols they run on, what's happening in that space for detection and things like that?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions that they ask from the threat intel side, right? Is how many drones are DIY, how many have been made themselves, and how many actually change those bands that they use to connect to the controller? Because theoretically, if you had a counter drone system that blocked or jammed or manipulated the 900 megahertz space, let's say, and you change your drone to use a different wireless part of the spectrum, then you're theoretically kind of separating yourself from that countermeasure. More and more countermeasures these days are trying to go, wideband, or kind of cover all the popular frequencies, that type of thing. Or they have the backup of being able to jam the GPS side as well as the RF bands. So a lot of counter drones companies were afraid of this. The threat intel tells us that it's growing, but it's not yet there. And this is probably because buying a drone and using it is so easy, and they're still not being stopped, that they haven't had to necessarily create custom countermeasures. If that makes sense? Like,
Yeah.
If you imagine a prison drop, a lot of operators either don't care about getting the drone back, so it's a one-way flight. They'll send the drone up, they'll drop the narcotics or the cell phones, SIM cards over the prison, and the drone will either crash because they don't care about $200, or because of the heavy payload, it's lost all its battery and it'll fly into a tree. You get very few operators who are veterans, and there is a specific veteran up in Canada. He was caught. Excuse me. He was caught because there was some forensics on the drone, which gave them the attribution of where he had taken off from. The guy as well had done some updates at his home. He had turned on the drone to do that. And because that registers the GPS location, they were able to go to all those targets and they found his house. So forensics on drones is something else. But he had flown over 40 missions to three different prisons in the area. So he was almost like a contract drone dropper. And we're going to see a lot more of that, I think. But yeah, the forensics part's really interesting because there are ways to scrub forensics off a drone, prevent caching, use secondhand accounts, do all that kind of, nefarious stuff, or just privacy aware stuff. So you can do that, but just flying a drone, like, for example, the other day I went for a walk at my local park. I spotted a drone in the tree. And so that drone had been caught there, took it down. You take the SD card out, you take the onboard storage out, and suddenly you can find out, where the person had flown. You can take all the GPS data where they've been. You can take the EXIF and metadata from the images, the videos. You've got the video footage itself. There's a whole bunch of things you can do in attribution to find out who is flying that drone, and also map on, say, Google Earth, the flight path of where it had been, the elevation it had been. There's tools that make that easier, but you can do that very simply, just with yourself and a drone.
Okay, so Rick, you're here, aren't you, Rick?
Hey, yep.
Hey man, how you going? So Rick works
good.
Rick works in maritime cybersecurity. Did you have any questions for Mike, buddy?
I do, yeah. It's quite an interesting topic for me because working with yachts, obviously some of the bigger yachts have some quite sophisticated systems on board, including those to detect and defeat drones as well. So obviously in different countries, there's different aspects around regulations and that kind of stuff. I just want to get your opinion on the regulatory side, especially of the defeat, because we kind of have to leave it with the responsibility of the operator with a clause that says, look, you need to know exactly where you are, what you're doing before actually operating this equipment, kind of passing on the responsibility. I just want to get your opinion on the advancing or just the regulatory side. I'm not even sure if it's advancing at all. It's quite different in different countries, I gather.
It is, and I would have no idea what it's like in maritime law or outside of a country's borders like that. But one of the reasons regulations exist is to prevent, let's say, not a yacht, but a larger ship or a military or a naval ship from getting a counter drone system that interferes with their signals, right? So the regulatory side says, you can't use this because that might leak out and affect your communications or things that are happening on the ship itself. Maybe not so much with the yacht. So one of the big things around that is if the drone is a good drone, or it's meant to be in that area, right, and you're taking it down, then you're destroying someone else's property. And if that drone, that we don't know what its purpose was, but you're just destroying it. So it's almost like if you see a boat coming towards yourself, you don't know which kind of boat it is, you're worried about it, it's got the potential to have guys that might be pirates on board, and you decide just to take it out before confirmation in a way. That's probably a little bit of where that's going. There's an interesting concept of the drones itself. Actually, that's probably on a different topic, but so the regulations are there to try and prevent you from taking out the wrong drone in a way. If it is the right drone and you manage to save everyone because it was carrying an explosive payload, then and you break the law, that's probably a good thing. But
I guess the regulation is also there to stop you jamming. What you're potentially doing is jamming the public radio frequencies at that. I know there's products out there that claim they can focus on the particular frequency the drone is using. I'm a bit skeptical of that. I think there's, the more reliable solution is to take the whole frequency band and just shut that down. But obviously then you've got collateral damage in terms of whatever system's nearby. So yeah,
and it's quite interesting. Some have opted to use the geofencing capability, not necessarily for the yachts, but the geofencing is the passive restriction out of an airspace. So if a drone enters a certain area, it's meant to just not be able to enter it or take off from there, because its internal GPS coordinates say you cannot be here, so the GPS system stops. Extremely simple to modify and manipulate. So if anyone has a brain, they can get in there and just remove that, or choose not to upload it, or change those restrictions so they can fly into that area. So geofencing is a terrible protection mechanism, and I'll keep saying that as many times as I hear, politicians asking, should geofencing be a good thing here?
Yeah, you're going to take out other things.
Exactly, and in fact, and a lot of new drone manufacturers are just forgetting about geolocations these days, because it's just useless in the adversary's power.
So
someone's mentioned
so it might be about enforcing regulation on the manufacturers, because like they kind of pass the buck, I guess. They make these drones and then pass the buck to the user. Like, is it about regulating the actual manufacturers of the drones, or is that leaves custom drones out, but it does take care of that massive chunk of the market where, that low dollar value to the entry point? Like, is this something that needs to be looked at, or is it something that's being looked at?
It is something that has been for a little while. So, for example, DJI, the drone maker, they've had geofencing in their systems for a while. You can't necessarily fly that drone into a certain area that's been protected unless you manipulate it. The problem with the restrictions on where you can fly is everyone thinks differently about them, right? So there is certain airspace above a prison which is restricted airspace, but above a critical infrastructure, place or a substation, it may not be restricted. And in fact, you can fly your drone over someone's property and there is no issue in Australia. Private property, unless it's restricted airspace, is not your airspace. So I could fly my drone as say, that a few times we've seen this with animal activists. They fly the drone over the property. They go and get a good picture of the people there, say, slaughtering the animals, and that allows them footage to be able to show to others. When the police are called, the police sit there and go, they're completely legal. They're flying legally. They're in their bounds of the airspace. They're 30 meters away from the animals. There's no problem. The only way you could get arrested for that is if you're actually standing on their property operating the drone. But if you're standing on the road flying your drone over their property, you're completely fine. So that's where the regulatory side has a few loopholes, because again, a national park, you're not meant to be flying drones in the national park, but if you stand outside the border and you fly a drone in, it may not have that same restriction. So
and for a beach or something like that, I suppose, as well. Over in Miami, you see drones flying over the beaches all the time. God knows what they're looking for there, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
What about the surprise of?
What about the taking of photographs and things like that? Does that impose on privacy laws, or it just doesn't matter? Or
no, a big matter, I guess, on that side of things. So in France, police started using drones for a lot of law enforcement operations. They're awesome for law enforcement, right? So you can send a small drone into a house to try and scope it out if there's a danger there before you send your agents in. You can use it for crowd control, things like that. But unfortunately, you can also use it to quickly gather every single person who's at a rally or a protest or things like that. Facial recognition capabilities on drones at this point are really decent, and they've got really zoom good. That is incredible, right? On top of infrared, thermal, night vision, all that type of thing. But collecting people's privacy and data is kind of unprecedented, because before you had these body cams on cops, or you had their car cameras. Now you've got a drone that has unrestricted airspace, access to the airspace, flying around the city, gathering all that data, both audio, visual, that type of thing. So police in France were actually restricted from continuing to be using drones. It was such a privacy outburst. The same kind of thing goes for, I think there was one case in up in the Netherlands. There was a nudist beach. Everyone was sunbathing without any clothes at all. Someone flew their drone over and just started taking pictures. And because it's a nudist beach, people don't take out their cameras and take pictures of each other. Even long zoom cameras don't work. It's a secluded area. But get a drone and suddenly you can get footage of everyone, and they can't hide themselves. So I use that example because that person went to trial, and it was a precedent. It was like, how do we restrict drones taking someone else's private pictures or privacy and that type of thing? So it is a big issue. But at the moment, in Australia, it's other than Queensland, I believe, it's very hard to restrict you from filming someone else with a drone. In a
I've got
public
an
place.
example of that over in Spain, in Mallorca, where there's restrictions still with the COVID side of things. They've introduced all the tourists back in, and they're closing the bars at 1 o'clock in the morning. And obviously everyone's coming out into the streets. So the police thought they'd use a drone, put it up there, trying to control the crowd that way. First night they did that. Second night, they didn't have the permits or registration in place to actually do it. So yeah, some privacy issues there, I think, from the Spanish point of view, using them for crowd control anyway.
It can be difficult for law enforcement to use drones like that as well, because they have to do a risk assessment of where they are. They have to get the permits and regulations, as you said. Especially in South Africa, using drones is super useful on big farms where you've got poachers and things like that. You're trying to track them. But if you have to try and get a permit each time and go through a risk and privacy assessment, it could delay things. So that's where we're seeing that kind of wavering between, they seem awesome for emergency services to use, especially, for the fire emergency services. They chuck up a drone, they can quickly see with a thermal camera where those spot fires are and send, the fire truck. But it gets quite difficult, as you mentioned, in Spain. It takes time to get that permit. So by that time, then it's useless even using a drone. So they resort to, and this is the thing that's happening all over the world, right? They resort to individual members using their drones that are not company drones. They're not procured by the emergency services department, which brings an onslaught of that drone may be a make and model that's vulnerable to the public, being able to break into them. It might be, completely not procured for data security and privacy reasons. So that data or vision that they're collecting could be leaked. And I just say that because time and time again, we're seeing drones skip any kind of procurement lines for companies.
Yeah.
As in, they will not go through pen testing, they won't go through vulnerability assessment, and they'll buy them from some street vendor, if you want to call it that, because there is no methodology to test drones. Yet, if they brought in a laptop, they've made sure it's got, BitLocker on it, they've made sure it's got EDP, all these different things. But with a drone, it's barely looked at. It's not even considered as part of the IT department's assets.
This is something you probably covered already. You were speaking earlier about the DJI drones. What's the proliferation like of the market with DJI? I was chatting to somebody the other day, and they've got a system that only really detects DJI drones. And I said, well, there's got to be other manufacturers out there doing the same thing. How big is that proliferation of DJI on the market? And are there lots of cheap ones out there as well?
There's heaps of cheap ones.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Go, Mike.
Oh, sure. Okay. Look, DJI probably still has 70% of the market, which is huge. In the commercial space, they're probably still quite up there. DJI, for those of you who don't know, is a Chinese brand and make creative drones. They make the best, without a doubt, the best featured drones, which is why everyone wants to buy them and use them. And the current problem with that is that there's this whole, issue of DJI, for example, is partly owned by, say, the Chinese Communist Party, or at least those allegations have been made. And so people are like, should we trust those DJI drones being in our government or military? The US military banned them even after multiple pen tests by, there was a pen test by Revolup, there was a pen test by one of the big consulting firms. There's been a number of public pen tests where the reports have been released where they say, look, we don't have data that there's exfiltration of that telemetry reaching, Chinese borders or things like that. So there's that whole sovereignty issue, right? And I like the stance, personally, like the stance of Mark Jacobson. So he was the creator of Rogue Squadron. And if you haven't heard of them, they were probably the most elite team of drone hackers and drone counter hackers you have ever heard of. And these guys created some incredible technology, from forensic analysis of drones to, drone counter drone software and systems that blew the other commercial stuff out of the water. And they were a government entity. So they were almost ran it like an agile software development team, even though they were in the government. And their ethos, or at least their view, was let's use these fully featured set drones, Chinese drones, but let's make them secure. And let's try to harden them first without that data exfiltrating out. Because think about it, let's say you've got a counterterrorism operation happening somewhere. Your agent decides to pull out a drone and send that drone up to gain a visual on the target. If they're doing that with a drone that is sending metadata or telemetry back to somewhere else, it could compromise that, that activity. So they want to be able to have a drone that they can use with all these awesome features that doesn't interfere with the data. The problem is, if you try to do that to a DJI drone today, you need to flash that firmware. You get about 2 to 3 weeks out of it, and then you have to reflash it, or you lose access or things like that. So it's a really manual process at the moment to try and secure drones, or at least prevent them from siphoning that data off.
Why is that? Sorry, Mike. Why is that? Why do you only get the 2 to 3 weeks out of the flashed firmware?
Because the drone will say it hasn't called home. It's like DRM.
Yeah, right.
And it will say, we haven't contacted the mother base. We've got to do something about this. This is the biggest problem about drones today or problem or advantage, or however your perspective. They have to be connected to the internet, and they have to be connected to their manufacturer a lot of the time. And they have to make those homing calls because their features rely on being internet connected to do all this kind of stuff. We just saw Parrot, one of the big drone vendors, put out a drone that is 4G only. So you can only fly this drone with GSM, using the cellular networks, which means that drone is always going to be on and active and accessible through the internet. You'll probably see it on Showdown somewhere. And at the same time, it makes it invulnerable to typical RF attacks, but it makes it vulnerable to those GSM attacks and to internet-bound attacks. So things are becoming way more connected than before, and your commercial drones are just operated by a single node sometimes that controls multiple drones. If you're able to compromise that node, you sometimes get access to all those drones, all that data. It's starting to go by an order of magnitude at the moment.
But I have to trust in that company that's selling you the drones as well, then, by the sounds of it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, what about drones and Shodan? Like, how often do they turn up on there? Is there much of a problem with people, just searching Shodan, hacking drones remotely?
So, good question, Ryan. Back in 2018, we started a research project internally here, and it was to try and find as many drones as we could that were on Shodan and be able to show people or demonstrate that they're online, always accessible. We were able to find drones that are sitting in a certain box, for surveillance. So if someone is detected on the perimeter, or every 15 minutes, that drone will fly up out of that rechargeable box. It'll do its round. If it spots someone, it has a speaker to warn them out of the area. It will record vision. It will have a floodlight on that person. It'll go back to its post and recharge for the next run. Those kind of drones are sometimes controlled by what's called a remote operating center, or a ROC, from halfway around the world. So those types of drones are always connected, and some of those will appear on Shodan. It's not too hard to find, but I think the scariest thing of all, and this is a talk that I think you can find on the internet somewhere, is we managed to find a live counter drone system on Shodan. Not just one, but 7, right? And these are systems that are sitting at places like Parliament House, right? Not actually at Parliament House, but they're sitting at Parliament House protecting the airspace from drones. You're able to find these systems online via Shodan. And then worst of all, their security is abominable. So you're able to just interact with that API. You're able to either take that drone off, stop it from protecting drones in that area, compromise the system. So there's some issues when you think about what is a person like me going to do if I want to fly a drone at a prison? So let's step this back. First thing I'd probably do is send up a canary drone. So a small drone with no payload, being able to fly it over. And if it gets detected or compromised, then you know that there's a counter drone system in the area. This is a typical tactic that we've seen in Canada that happens again and again. So once the drone has been taken down, you're like, all right, they know that we know there's a counter drone system. So how do we overcome that counter drone system? The one is being able to locate it on the web and disable it, right? Because you don't want to fly a drone where there is a counter drone system. And so that's your one tactic. The other is just physical intrusion. So a lot of the time they're relying on these counter drone systems to sit on a tall advantage point to be able to have a view of the area, detect and mitigate that drone. But if you could pull out the power, if you could manipulate that physical system, if you could get access to it somehow, then you're just allowing yourself to get in there. So a lot of the time we're seeing both on the OPSEC side and on the physical side and digital side, these counter drone systems they can protect against drones, but they can't protect against people attacking them. And I think that's a big worry is, they're dealing with aviation systems, yet they're failing to secure them properly as well. So there is some interesting things on Shodan. We for a reason didn't include everything within the one of the training courses that you would have done, Ryan.
Yeah.
But I think we hinted.
It was very interesting though, mate. Very, very interesting. It didn't take much maneuvering to figure out what needed to be done. So is so you've got an anti-drone system. Is it the manufacturers that are shortcomings there, like with the OPSEC stuff, or is it just the industry isn't mature enough yet to understand what it's vulnerable to?
Speed to market, being the first to market counter drone systems, the ones that started first are generally the ones that are still around today. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of counter drone companies. Each one thinks that it does the best job at radar detection or countermeasures. We've seen everything from a box full of Yagi antennas that are connected to, a hacker F1 type thing. We've seen, systems that are super expensive military-based systems, but they just decided to get into the counter-drone space because they were already doing something similar. The best counter-drone systems out there are stacked multi-systems, so optical recognition, acoustic, RF. You had problems with the acoustic guys trying to detect a drone, and then someone would mow their lawn a kilometer away, and suddenly they get a warning that there's a swarm of drones incoming, because the acoustic signals from the lawnmower affected it. So you can't rely on one single source. Just like using, say, a forensic tool, you've got to use multiple to be able to determine what's going on. The manufacturers want to be first, and they want to capture that market. And everyone is asking for counter drone systems at the moment. You've got 1,000 different US military outfits with no single procurement area trying to secure their own counter drone systems. And so there's a lot of things called test and evaluation, where they're trying to determine the effectiveness of a system, and how they measure if it works or not. But at the moment, you're right on the money when you say it's a vendor issue where security is second to mind. The first thing is taking out a drone, and the security side doesn't matter as much to them. That's where you need independent evaluators to come along and say the system is vulnerable to X, Y, Z.
The cost of these systems are pretty prohibitive as well, from what I've seen. Ranging from tens of thousands up to potentially millions, depending on the application of it. So, yeah, I'm not sure how they can get away with charging that.
Hey Rick, is this a big issue in your part of the industry? Are drones something that are on people's minds?
They are, but the costs, like I say, are quite prohibitive at the moment. So, with larger yachts, for example, they're going to go all out. They're going to spend a couple of million on a really nice, fancy system, military grade, and you won't get a drone near it. Some of these systems, like I asked about the DJI drones earlier, there's some systems you pay millions for. They detect 90% of DJI drones. But then the others, the detection isn't so good. So then you've got the smaller yachts where, the cost is just too prohibitive, and the equipment is often too big and clunky to actually, put anywhere on a yacht without ruining the fine lines of
the aesthetic.
Aesthetics, that's it. That's the word I was thinking of. So definitely on people's minds, but not far from mainstream in that area, unless you're a billionaire.
So, Mike, is there anything that you've seen, like in the lower end of the market, that's coming out? Anything that looks promising for a lower dollar value entry point?
Look, there's a lot of detection sensors which are getting cheaper, so they're realizing they can't necessarily charge a whole bunch for a single sensor that is, at one point it has a 360 azimuth, and it looks for drones up high and around it at a 5 kilometer radius. What you're seeing being a little bit better, and it comes back to that smart cities model of cities that want to have an entire operational view or common operating picture, is small sensors as a mesh placed at strategic points around a city. So what's the perfect example of that? Well, mobile cell towers. So where you might see detection networks starting as those mobile cell towers or GSM towers, where they're each at a point trying to detect different drones from an RF basis. So you can see things as cheap as $1,500 per sensor, and so that, but then you're timesing that by say 20 or 30 around a perimeter. That's not the countermeasure side though. If you're trying to counter a drone, those solutions can cost a variety of ways. But as Rick said, it's more the military systems that cost in the millions. Some of the common ones, like those drone guns and things like that, they're sometimes you can call them a glorified Yagi on
Bit of a gimmick
with a trigger.
sometimes, those things.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh man, they look real cool.
They're
Yeah,
that's right.
true.
Very futuristic. Those ones can be on the cheaper end, but they can sometimes still be 70 to 200K for a countermeasure. And what's the whole point here, right? You're trying to stop a drone. Yes, the risk might be in the thousands or millions, but the drone itself is only $200 or $400. So your mitigation is costing way more than your return on investment if you want to think about it in business terms. And it comes back to that story of back in Syria, one of the height of ISIS, the US Army had to utilize one of the Patriot missiles to take down a drone, and they looked back at it and were just like, look, this was a $4 million missile, against a $200 drone. The economic trade-off was so different. It's almost not worth it. What do we do here? So at the moment, the cost to defeat a drone is a lot more, and that's where I think, from the InfoSec side, there's so many solutions that we come up with, open source stuff, which is free, that could do a better job. But for some reason, the InfoSec community hasn't necessarily seen that link or connection between the counter drone elements just yet. That's why hopefully there'll be a call to more people to get into the space, because look, we've had some really interesting people join, DroneSec, but the drone security kind of industry. There have been people that have built some of the Wi-Fi tooling that a lot of you and I use that have gone into the industry. There's also been those that were, say, military drone pilots or fighter jet pilots, and they've come into the space because they realize there's intersection of aviation, cybersecurity, drones. And if you look at it, it's almost like you've got your CISOs, right, of companies, and then you've got your CSOs, and the CSOs they look at both physical and digital security. That's the only way you can look at drones, is what kind of digital things can I do to a drone, and what kind of physical effect will it have? Because that drone is now hovering around somewhere. That was a bit of a rant, but you get what I'm saying. It's
is that what makes it difficult? Because it's a cyberkinetic weapon. Is this what makes it difficult for CISOs and CSOs to make policies about, because it spans those two areas?
Yeah, it's like who owns the drone problem, right? Like if you're a company, does your tech department own it, or the operations guys? How do the security guys get alerts? There's nothing that manages a drone fleet that sends those alerts to your SIEM. Splunk won't ingest a bunch of alerts from your counter drone system. So who is going to combine that? So that's the big problem. That's one of the problems that DroneSec is working on, obviously, but that's the issue where no one knows which area of security it's going to fall under.
So tell us about what DroneSec's doing, like what you provide besides awesome training, which is really good, by the way. What is it that DroneSec does?
Yeah, and I appreciate the comment, Ryan.
Plug.
Honestly, we get such good feedback from people in terms of how to make it better and how to improve it. Look, the training was quite interesting. So DroneSec creates cybersecurity and threat intelligence solutions for drones. The whole point here is that we try to look at protecting friendly drones from being hijacked, hacked into, denial of service, as well as that phase of those malicious drones. And we started out by doing that with threat intelligence. The way we first started, we were doing a bit of red teaming with drones. So physical intrusion simulations against, say, substations or government buildings, that kind of thing. How can we use a drone to surveil the area, find low-hanging fences, be able to watch guard timings, see if they actually notice a drone near the window or gathering Wi-Fi, data, that type of thing. And drones give you an unprecedented advantage in a red team for various reasons. But when we came to do these scenarios and when we wanted to test a scenario, we were like, we have to mirror real life activities, right? You can't just come up with your own ideas for using a drone against a perimeter. So one of the requirements of this was to gather as much realistic data as we could about other attackers or adversaries using it in, say, Canada, the UK, Australia, but also the Middle East. So we started gathering this threat intelligence, and we were trying to gather as many incidents as possible. And so we designed an internal tool just for ourselves, because we were consulting at the time. And we called it Notify, and we basically allowed you to use big data in a way that's like, you search in, let's say, a type of drone, you'll get all the incidents that relate to that drone, how they were used, the tactics, techniques, procedures, the locations, that type of thing. Super useful, for example, if you were to look up, say, like betting or gambling, you'd find all the incidents where people use drones to cheat the system, where they're watching a race and they can bet on a horse before the systems update, that type of thing. So that internal tool, we were just using ourselves, and then continually some of our customers were like, what are you using to create these simulations? How are you creating a scenario with this type of drone? How do we know it's going to be realistic? And so we were able to, end up saying, well, let's make that internal tool public. And that's how Notify started selling to the public. The training was really interesting because it was never going to happen. We had our internal training for when guys came in and they started DroneSec. A lot of the time they'd have too many questions. They'd be like, I don't understand the drone area, or I don't understand this or that. So the training was a way of not retraining every person that came in. And very quickly we found a lot of customers would also have those same questions over and over again. They wouldn't understand what they're getting. And they'd be like, can drones be hacked? We're just sitting there, trying to not roll our eyes. And so it became a way of just flicking them to this directory of videos or training we had, and saying, why don't you have a look at that and then come back to us and tell us if you have a problem or if you need some work done. And that's where they just said, this is terrible that we're getting this for free. Can you please, make it into a paid training? And so apparently there's a thing in companies where if you're end of year, you have budgets, you have to pay for it. And government was turning around and saying, we can't take this for free. It's a gift policy. So we need to buy it. So we actually turned the training into paid training as a point of that. And it's been great to get people to understand if there's an issue, because in some cases they don't actually need a drone security company to come and pen test their drones, because they're using their own drones, or they've hardened them or something like that. So the training is a great way of separating that. But look, we've done some interesting research. One of them has been, looking at the MITRE attack, scenarios, the enterprise and the ICS matrix, and trying to determine what applies to drones. Because if you have that same kind of, stopgap of seeing how someone compromises a drone, does a lateral movement, or compromises a node and gets into the others, what elements of the MITRE attack framework are already there and that we can apply. So we've done some interesting research in that point, but the big vision for DroneSec is really that whole safe and secure drone operations. Too many companies today are not using drones, even though they're awesome, as I'm sure we can all agree, because they're just like, they think there's too many risks out there. So if we can help, reduce some of those risks, they can have a drone program, their innovation scales, they get to use cool stuff, take people out of dangerous jobs, all that type of nice fluffy stuff. So yeah, that's really where it's at in terms of DroneSec. Mainly our clients are threat intel based. So for example, they'll want to plan a VIP route of someone traveling from one area to another. And so they'll query us and say, is there any threat intelligence to suggest there's been rogue drone operations in a certain area? We might be able to turn around and say, yes, there was 3 incidents of people using drones in that area in the past 3 months. They were using explosive payloads, or, a local cartel has been using them to surveil police. Maybe you should use a different route, or maybe we just give them the data, they can make the decision. And then, of course, there's the cybersecurity side. So, Ryan, you may have seen a little while ago, there was a forum where a post appeared about a drone schematics being sold. They wanted to sell it for like $18,000, and they would give you the blueprints or the schematics of the drone. Why is that important? Well, if you can reverse engineer that drone, you find out how to create that spoof. You can then force that drone down if you see it in the field. And this was a military drone, so that's why there was a bit more care around it. So we use a lot of open source intelligence. If there is a drone video on TikTok, we'll probably pick it up. If there's a drone mentioned in some kind of language somewhere, we're going to pick it up. And that comes back to, you know, being able to determine if a counter drone system has seen a drone or not. You can compare it with open source intelligence and be able to tell if it was good or bad.
Yeah, cool. Well, it looks like we're coming up to the hour mark. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Mike or Rick?
I think that's good for now. I'm really interested in the threat intelligence piece. So sounds like you've given the course a thumbs up already. So
yeah, man,
I'm already
it's
looking
actually
at that myself, so.
it was amazing. Actually, it was opened my eyes to how wide the whole drone space is. Like it's
massive. It's massive.
it's yeah. It was mind blowing. Actually, some of the stuff I learned in that. Just yeah.
I think
it's really good.
we probably only just scratched the surface here this evening as well. But yeah, I'll be in touch, Mike.
That sounds good. Look, one last thing. I saw a comment there that said in France they were using drones for, you know, speed cameras, watching, you know, motorways and things like that. And just
Same in Spain.
Yeah, just wanted to remind you about one thing that happened, and it was pretty interesting. So in Israel, there was this research project that was based on, you know, where you have Teslas or vehicles that read street signs as they drive past. They'll read a street sign that says 80 kilometers an hour, and so they'll change their pace to 80 kilometers an hour. And they found that, you know, by using a drone with a small projector based on the bottom of it, you could fly to one of these signs or fly to one of these underpasses. You could shine a projection of a speed sign saying it's 100. And that car would automatically change speed to a faster speed. You could also change it to a stop sign. And so when that car's, you know, hurtling down the freeway at 100 kilometers an hour, it sees a stop, slams on the brakes. And so there's a whole slew of things that are, drones aren't just the thing that changes it. It's just this extension of the capabilities, right? So super interesting area. Always happy to chat more about it.
Definitely. Yeah. And definitely keen to get you back on for sure. Well, that's Haunted Hacker for today, mate, with your Australian host. Thanks for coming on, Rick. Right. Thanks for coming on, Mike. Thank you, everyone. And
absolute pleasure.
We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Right. See you guys.